Marcus Reed tightened the straps of his worn backpack and took his first step off the plane. The smell of jet fuel mixed with the sweet, distant scent of fresh-cut grass. Families cheered and waved handmade signs, their joy filling the small airport terminal. Children raced into the arms of parents they hadn't seen in months. Marcus stood still for a moment, his boots rooted to the ground, watching it all as if through a thick pane of glass. He was home, technically, but something deep inside him whispered that home was not the same, and neither was he. His sister Megan found him first. She threw her arms around him, nearly knocking him off balance. Marcus hugged her back, stiffly at first, then more tightly when he caught the familiar scent of the shampoo she always used. Their parents were close behind, tears shining in their eyes as they pulled him into a group hug. Words like "welcome back" and "we're so proud of you" buzzed around him, but they felt far away. On the drive home, Marcus stared out the window. The streets he once knew by heart now looked unfamiliar. New stores had opened. Old buildings had been torn down. Life had gone on without him, and he was not sure where he fit anymore. Megan chatted from the front seat about everything he had missed: new neighbors, weddings, babies. Marcus smiled politely, but inside, he felt like a visitor to a town he used to call his own. At home, his childhood room waited for him, preserved almost like a museum exhibit. Posters from high school, dusty trophies from long-forgotten baseball games, a faded photo of him and his dad fishing at the lake. It was all there, exactly how he had left it. Yet standing in the doorway, Marcus felt like an imposter. That night, sleep refused to come. He lay awake, listening to the old house creak and settle. Every small noise made his body tense. His mind replayed memories he would rather forget. Long nights under foreign skies, the sudden crack of gunfire, the faces of those who did not make it home. He pressed his palms against his eyes, willing the images away. Coming home was supposed to fix everything. That was what everyone said. But as Marcus sat alone in the dark, he realized something he could not ignore. Coming home was only the beginning of a different kind of battle, one he had no idea how to fight. And for the first time in a long time, he was terrified he might lose. Marcus tried everything he could think of to blend back into civilian life. He updated his resume, bought a few new shirts, even practiced how to talk about his military service without making people uncomfortable. On paper, he looked like the perfect candidate for any job. Disciplined, hardworking, a proven leader. But when he sat across from hiring managers in tidy office buildings, he felt like a ghost trying to pass as a real person. The questions they asked seemed simple. Tell us about yourself. Where do you see yourself in 5 years? Marcus answered with the words he thought they wanted to hear, but inside, every answer felt hollow. How could he explain that 5 years ago, he only thought about surviving the next day? How could he talk about ambition when every morning still felt like a battle to even get out of bed? Old friends reached out at first, eager to reconnect. They invited him to cookouts, baseball games, weekend trips. Marcus showed up a few times, standing stiffly at the edges of conversations, laughing when it seemed appropriate. But crowds made him uneasy, and the small talk exhausted him. Eventually, the invitation slowed and then stopped altogether. No one said it out loud, but Marcus knew he had become the friend who was easier to forget. The nights were the worst. In the dark, there was nothing to distract him. Sleep came in broken fragments, haunted by dreams that felt too real. He would jolt awake, heart pounding, every nerve screaming for action. Sometimes he would find himself standing by the window in the middle of the night, scanning the quiet street as if waiting for something terrible to appear. He tried everything people suggested: meditation apps, therapy sessions, long runs through the park. Some days, he almost believed he was getting better. Other days, he felt like he was drowning in silence, and no one even noticed. The hardest part was how invisible it all was. If he had come home with a broken arm or a limp, people would have understood. But when the wounds were on the inside, there was no cast, no crutch, nothing to explain why simple things like grocery shopping or hearing a car backfire could send his heart racing. Marcus was a soldier without a battlefield, a fighter with no clear enemy. and each passing day made it harder to believe that he would ever find his way back to the man he used to be. One rainy afternoon, Marcus found himself walking aimlessly through the streets. The weight of the day's silence pressed heavily on his chest, and he didn't know where to go, so he let his feet guide him. He passed a dozen stores he never noticed before and watched people rush by with umbrellas and hurried steps, their lives moving around him while he felt stuck in place. By the time he reached the small animal shelter on the corner, he was soaked to the bone. He hadn't planned on going in. He just wanted a place to pause, to escape from the constant hum of his thoughts. The shelter wasn't large, and it had a faded sign out front, but something about it made him step inside. The smell of disinfectant and dry food mixed with a hint of something earthy and comforting. A woman behind the counter greeted him, but Marcus barely heard her. His eyes were drawn to the rows of cages, each one containing a dog or cat. Some were barking and wagging their tails, others sitting quietly, waiting. He kept walking, stopping only when he reached the last kennel. There, in the farthest corner, a German shepherd lay still, its eyes fixed on him. The dog's coat was rough but clean, and its large, intelligent eyes seemed to be studying Marcus in a way that made him pause. The dog didn't bark or jump up like the others. It simply watched, waiting. The shelter worker, noticing his attention, walked over. "This is Ranger," she said, her voice gentle. "He's been here a while. He's a good dog, but he's had a tough past. He's calm, though, very steady." Marcus looked at the dog for a moment, his heart unexpectedly heavy. He wasn't sure why, but something about the quiet, patient dog drew him in. It wasn't the dog's appearance or the way it stood still. It was the unspoken understanding in those eyes, as if it, too, had seen things that no one else could understand. He stepped closer to the kennel, his hand instinctively reaching out. The moment his fingers brushed against the cold metal bars, Ranger's eyes softened, and he took a slow step forward. Without a sound, the dog placed his paw against the bars, offering a simple gesture of trust. "I'll take him," Marcus said before he could second-guess himself. The shelter worker smiled, leading him to the paperwork. But as they finalized the adoption, Marcus couldn't help but feel something he hadn't in a long time: hope. Ranger had no expectations, no judgment, just a silent, steady presence. And for the first time in what felt like forever, Marcus thought maybe, just maybe, he wasn't so alone after all. The first few days with Ranger were awkward. Marcus had never owned a dog before, and he wasn't sure what to do with the quiet creature who seemed content to simply exist in the same space as him. At night, Ranger would curl up on the floor beside Marcus' bed, never asking for much, just a steady companion in the darkness. Marcus wasn't used to this kind of quiet, the peaceful kind that wasn't filled with the noise of his own thoughts. It wasn't until the third day that Marcus started to notice something. He had been sitting on the couch, staring at the television without really watching, when he felt something warm nudge against his leg. Looking down, he saw Ranger sitting there, his brown eyes fixed on Marcus, waiting patiently. The dog's presence wasn't demanding, but it was undeniable, a calm weight that seemed to ground him. At first, Marcus pushed the dog away gently, not sure how to react. But Ranger didn't seem to mind. The dog simply moved to a different spot, then returned to sit by his side again, never rushing, never asking for anything but the quiet bond they were forming. Over the next week, their routine became clearer. Marcus would wake up, stumble out of bed, and Ranger would be there, ready for a walk, his tail wagging just enough to show his enthusiasm. Marcus would sigh, sometimes grumbling, but always lacing up his shoes. They walked for miles, sometimes in silence, sometimes with Marcus talking aimlessly as Ranger trotted beside him, his head held high, his ears perked. Ranger never judged. He never seemed to mind that Marcus wasn't the man he used to be. When Marcus was lost in thought, Ranger would nudge his hand, offering comfort without saying a word. There was something pure about it, something simple and real. But there were times when Marcus couldn't bring himself to leave the house. The weight of the past would settle on his chest like a stone, and the world outside felt too loud, too overwhelming. On those days, Ranger would stay close by. He would lie on the floor at Marcus's feet, sometimes resting his head on Marcus's knee, as if he understood that some days just being near was enough. And sometimes Marcus would reach down and scratch behind Ranger's ears, a smile tugging at his lips as the dog's eyes closed in contentment. It was small moments like these that made Marcus feel a spark of hope, something he hadn't felt in months. Ranger didn't need him to be perfect. He just needed him to show up, to be there. It wasn't love yet, but it was something close. And for the first time in a long time, Marcus felt like he had found a lifeline, not in the world around him, but in the quiet, steady presence of a dog who didn't ask for anything more than a chance. It was a late summer evening when everything changed. The kind of night when the air felt thick with humidity and the sound of distant thunder rumbled ominously. Marcus sat by the window, staring out into the darkening sky. The weight of the world seemed to press down on him, his mind drifting through memories he couldn't control. His hands clenched into fists, and he could feel the familiar tightness in his chest, the tightness that always came when the past crept back into his thoughts. Suddenly, the first crack of thunder split the sky, and Marcus flinched, his heart pounding in his ears. The flashbacks came in an instant, the heat of the desert sun, the deafening roar of explosions, the sharp, cutting silence after the chaos. His breath came in shallow gasps, his body frozen as the memories flooded in. The world around him blurred, and all he could hear was the sound of his own panicked heartbeat. His chest tightened further, and for a moment, he couldn't breathe. He couldn't move. Panic gripped him like a vice, and he felt himself slipping into a place he didn't want to go. But then, just as suddenly, there was a soft pressure against his side. He didn't realize what it was at first, too lost in the storm raging inside his head. But when the pressure grew, gentle yet firm, Marcus turned to see Ranger standing beside him. The dog's dark eyes locked onto his, and in that moment, it felt like everything outside of them disappeared. Ranger didn't bark. He didn't growl. He simply stood there, his large body pressing against Marcus, grounding him with a calmness that cut through the chaos. Ranger stayed there, unmoving, his body close enough that Marcus could feel the warmth of his fur. The thunder continued to roar outside, but inside, Marcus slowly began to focus on the steady rhythm of the dog's breathing, the solid presence of the animal beside him. Slowly, the panic began to fade, like fog lifting from a cold morning. The fear that had taken root in his chest loosened its grip, and he felt the weight of his own body again, the ground beneath his feet. Marcus took a deep breath, his hand shaking as he reached down to scratch the back of Ranger's ears. The dog leaned into the touch, eyes half closed in contentment. There were no words, no grand gestures, just a quiet understanding that Marcus hadn't realized he needed so desperately. And in that moment, for the first time in what felt like years, Marcus wasn't alone in the dark. As the weeks passed, Marcus found himself beginning to change. It wasn't a sudden shift, but a slow, gradual transformation. He started to look forward to the mornings, to the quiet routine that had formed between him and Ranger. The walks, the simple companionship, they became the anchor in a life that had once felt adrift. Marcus enrolled in a service dog training program with Ranger, unsure at first, but willing to try anything that might help. The first few sessions were rough. Marcus wasn't used to being in control of someone else, especially not a dog. But Ranger, calm and steady as always, quickly learned what was asked of him, and so did Marcus, though in his own way. They worked on basic commands at first: sit, stay, come. It was simple stuff, but there was something reassuring about the structure, the consistency. Every command became a promise that Ranger was there for him, and that Marcus could learn to trust him, just as Ranger trusted him. On the days when Marcus couldn't make it out of bed, Ranger was there, his nose gently nudging Marcus's hand, his eyes never demanding, but always patient. On the days when the weight of the world felt too much, Ranger would sit by his side, his presence a constant reminder that he wasn't alone. The bond between them deepened. What had begun as a quiet understanding grew into something stronger, something almost unbreakable. Marcus found himself doing things he hadn't in a long time, going to the store, meeting friends for coffee, even laughing at the ridiculous things they said. Ranger's silent encouragement gave him the courage to try again. One afternoon, Marcus took Ranger to a local park. The sky was clear, the sun warm on their backs. As they walked through the park, a woman came over, her dog pulling her toward them. Ranger stiffened slightly, but instead of pulling back, he stayed calm. Marcus noticed it immediately. Ranger was learning, adapting to the world around him. "Is this your dog?" the woman asked with a smile. "He's amazing." Marcus returned the smile, feeling something new stir in him. "Yeah, he is," he said, his voice steady. "He saved me more times than I can count." In that moment, Marcus realized how much had changed. It wasn't just the dog that had saved him. It was the way he had allowed himself to heal, to trust again, to believe that life didn't have to be a series of battles. There was still work to be done, but with Ranger by his side, Marcus felt like he was finally moving forward. Together, they were building a new future, one step at a time. It didn't take long before Marcus realized that his story with Ranger was bigger than just the two of them. As word spread about the bond they shared, people started reaching out. It started small, a phone call from a local veterans group, a few emails from people who'd heard about the service dog training program. But soon, Marcus was being invited to speak at local events and support groups. At first, he hesitated. He wasn't a public speaker, and the thought of standing in front of a room full of strangers made his heart race. But then he looked at Ranger, lying quietly beside him, as if encouraging him to speak. It was as if Ranger knew that Marcus had a story that needed to be told, not just for him, but for the others who might be struggling in silence. The first time Marcus stood in front of a crowd, his nerves were overwhelming. He barely remembered what he said, something about how it felt to come home and feel like a stranger in your own life. How the weight of the past could make even the simplest moments feel impossible. He talked about how Ranger had found him when he was lost and how together they were building a future step by step. When he finished, there was a long silence in the room. Then slowly, people started to stand, one by one. They clapped, not just for him, but for themselves, for the struggles they had been facing in silence. It was the kind of applause that made Marcus feel like he wasn't just telling his own story. He was telling the story of every person who had ever felt invisible, every person who had ever believed they were beyond help. The emails and messages flooded in after that. Veterans shared their own experiences with Marcus, some of them still struggling, some of them finding their own way to heal. Many reached out to ask about Ranger, how a dog could make such a difference, how they could find their own Ranger. Marcus began to see a pattern. People who had been in the same dark place he had once been were starting to come out of the shadows. They were opening up, sharing their pain, and finding the strength to keep moving forward. It wasn't just about Ranger anymore. It was about the hope that healing could happen, even in the most unexpected ways. And as Marcus shared his story, he realized that he wasn't just helping others. He was healing too, one conversation at a time. Every story he heard, every message of gratitude, filled in the cracks that still lingered in his heart. He wasn't alone, and neither were they. Months passed, and Marcus's life had transformed in ways he could have never predicted. He had stopped looking at his past with regret and started focusing on the future. Each day was a little brighter, a little more hopeful, as he continued to build a life with Ranger by his side. Together, they were more than just a veteran and his dog. They were a symbol of resilience, of finding strength in the darkest places. One morning, Marcus woke up early as he often did now, and sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee in his hands. Ranger lay at his feet, as always, his soft breathing the only sound in the room. Marcus looked around the quiet house, at the life he was creating, and felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. He had come so far from the man who had stumbled off the plane, unsure of who he was or where he belonged. As he gazed out the window, the sun rising over the horizon, Marcus thought about how much had changed, how much he had changed. He thought about the men and women who had shared their stories with him, how their strength had given him strength. He thought about the power of connection, of knowing that there were others out there who understood what it meant to be lost and to find a way back. And in that moment, he realized that his purpose wasn't just about healing for himself anymore. It was about helping others find their way too. Marcus began working with local veterans organizations, using his story to inspire others who were struggling. He and Ranger became regulars at support group meetings, where Marcus spoke about the importance of companionship and finding the right kind of support. He talked about how Ranger had saved him, not just from the nightmares of the memories, but from the isolation that had once consumed him. It wasn't always easy. There were still days when Marcus felt the weight of the past, when the memories threatened to pull him under. But now he knew how to fight back. He didn't have to do it alone. One afternoon, after a particularly powerful speech, a young veteran approached Marcus with tears in his eyes. "I've been where you were," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I didn't think I'd ever get out of it. But hearing about Ranger, gives me hope." That was all Marcus needed to hear. It wasn't just about him anymore. It was about the lives he was touching, the hearts he was helping to heal. With Ranger by his side, Marcus knew that no matter what the future held, he was ready to face it. And together, they would continue moving forward, one step at a time.